They're going to attack oil fields in the Persian Gulf and European capitals. Millions are going to die. There's going to be a total global breakdown in the economy.
So they will use those nuclear weapons against Israel and against European capitals.
I have no doubt about it that they'll bring that about. They're going to arm Hezbollah, they're going to arm Hamas, they're going to arm Islamic Jihad, Syria.
He says the only solution is for America to overthrow the regime.
You attack the guards, the nuclear facilities, and announce to the Iranian people that we're going to support you, come out and do what you wish to do with this regime. The regime will collapse much faster than anybody thinks.
It's just one of many revelations he hopes will reach America's leadership before it's too late. Eric Stakelbeck, CBN News, Washington.
Let's further examine his pronunciations about suicidal terrorism. He writes, "Suicidal terrorism is a direct response to the occupation and bombing of people's lands by a much more powerful nation that they are not technologically capable of fighting with conventional warfare." For more information on this, please read the book Dying to Win by Robert Pape, the world's foremost expert on suicide terrorism. Really? The foremost expert? Why? Because he was in the back of a Michael Scheuer book? Is there anything interesting left to be said about suicidal terrorism? Robert A. Pape sure thinks there is, and so will you if you're fooled by cockeyed statistics and Dying to Win. The data shows, Pape explains, that there's little connection between suicide terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism. According to Pape, occupation and not Islam is the best predictor of suicidal behavior. He explains that before September 11th, 75 out of 186 suicide attacks since 1980 have been committed by Hindus, the Tamil Tigers of Sri Lanka. It's a small number. Furthermore, he continues, the fundamentalist Islamic countries in which the United States has not stationed troops, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Iran, Egypt, and Nigeria, have produced one al-Qaeda terrorist for every 71 million citizens, while those in which the United States has stationed troops, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, have produced one al-Qaeda terrorist for every 1 million citizens. It's amazing how he labels the Pakistanis who have the ISI or neck high in al-Qaeda, whether you want to label them as ISI operatives or local militant operatives as opposed to actual al-Qaeda operatives, is beyond the point. Or the entire country of Iran, or the entire military clique in Iran, or the Muslim Brotherhoods in Egypt, who don't have America's interests. But let's move on. Pape provides 14 pages of charts and usually labels the Bush administration approach as embarking on a policy to conquer Muslim countries. Yeah, that's what happened. The problem for Pape is one doesn't need more than a glancing familiarity with concepts like sample size and distribution to realize his statistics are not only misleading, but also meaningless. First of all, factoring 315 suicide terrorists into 1 billion people is just foolishness, a sort of statistical homeopathy. And with such a small set, only 15 total campaigns over 30 years, one group can easily flood the average. It is technically true that if the Tamil Tigers included, almost half of all pre-September 11th suicide attacks were committed by non-Muslims. But if they are excluded, it is clear from Pape's own charts that every single other suicide attack since 1980 was committed by a Muslim. Since September 11th, this has included bombings by Kashmirs, Chechens, Palestinians, Afghanis, Saudis, and Iraqis. The Tamils are obvious statistical outliers, and even Pape acknowledges that they didn't start using suicide bombers until after a number of them returned from training in Lebanon. Pape plays a similar trick in trying to demonstrate that occupation, not Islam, is the fertile seed of suicide bombings. The best test of whether a country is occupied, he says, is if the local government requires the power of foreign stabilizing troops or police in order to maintain order. Accepting his definition, it isn't at all obvious that al-Qaeda qualifies. The United States did station thousands of troops in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War, but it's hard to argue that Saudis needed American troops to maintain internal order. U.S. troops were explicitly required not to leave their bases and forbidden from receiving pornography, hardly the footprint of a triumphant colonial army. Well, I know this person is no Robert Pape in regards to an expert on suicidal terrorism, but let's see what this person has to say in regards to Robert Pape by Asaf Makdam. Motives for Martyrdom: Al-Qaeda, Saluf fi Jihad, and the spread of suicide attacks. Suicide missions made their modern debut in 1981. In recent years, however, they have witnessed an unprecedented increase according to several indicators, including number of attacks, number of organizations conducting these attacks, number of countries targeted, and number of victims. Existing explanations, including the occupation and outbidding thesis, cannot account for the dramatic increase in spread of suicide attacks. A combination of quantitative and qualitative methods, including analysis of a data set of 1,857 suicide attacks from December 1981 through March 2008, suggests that two interrelated factors have contributed to the globalization of martyrdom: Al-Qaeda's evolution into global terrorist actor and the growing appeal of its guiding ideology, Salafi Jihad. As localized patterns of suicide missions have given way to more globalized patterns, states must rethink their counter-terrorism strategies. At the same time, because Salafi jihadist groups tend to target Muslims, moderate Muslims and non-violent Salafists may take the lead in challenging these groups. Now, I know it's no Robert Pape, but the Saf Makdam appears to have a differing point of view than Robert Pape. I mean, the sheer amount of experts that disagree with Robert Pape, it's endless. But here's just some of them for laughs and giggles. Santos lectured on how Islam could be purified in the Philippines. Aside from a session on the global dimensions of jihad, the trainees also learned bomb-making and urban guerrilla warfare. Allegedly, the indoctrination highlighted martyrdom missions, specifically suicide bombings, by repeated exposure to the message that the greatest sacrifice is giving one's life to Allah and Islam. From Philippine Security in the Age of Terror, National, Regional, and Global Challenges in the Post-9/11 World by Romel Banoli. That's Banlaoi. The glorious and blissful afterlife of those who have shed their blood in jihad, explaining that Allah has created a paradise of 100 levels and that martyred mujahideen will be given the highest part of this paradise. Those will be allowed to roam around paradise if they wish to do so. Furthermore, the document states that a shaheed will be granted 7 special favors by Allah, namely 1, forgiveness of sin, 2, a place in paradise, 3, a cloth of an imam, modest yet high quality, 4, marriage to 72 Hurur al-Ainin, beautiful women of paradise, 5, salvation from the grave, 6, protection from the great fear of judgment day, and 7, a crown of honor that will be placed on his head. At the same time, it asserts that those who are killed in a jihad will never experience any pain except when they feel the prick of a needle. The document also expounds on 3 types of martyrdom and argues that the best way to experience martyrdom is to die through hemorrhage when one's limbs are cut off by the sword during a jihad. Promoting transnational jihad, that affirms that a military expedition in the sea is better than 10 military expeditions on land. Finally, it sanctifies the use of suicide tactics by mujahideen, as it promises that martyrs who died by their own weapons will be amply rewarded with twice the amount of those killed by their enemies. It maintains that the messenger Muhammad will bear witness that those who died with their own swords are martyrs in front of Allah. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Let's rely on Robert Pape. Why? His other supposed point. Blowback. Oh, this is where the Ron Paulites like to take one word to explain American foreign policy. Blowback. See, it's not suicidal jihadism. It's not communism. It's not even the British Empire, or the Vietnamese, or Hitler's brown shirts, or Mussolini, or the Japanese. No, everything on the planet happens because of the United States. That's basically what blowback means. He goes on, CIA operatives, including Michael Scheuer, former chief of the Bin Laden unit. Well, if it isn't the Ron Paul go-to bureaucrat of the CIA, Michael Scheuer, well, blows me down. I give off. I'll tell you what. I'll give to when Gary Bernstein calls. Or perhaps, an actual CIA operative like Reza Khalili calls. Until then, keep your go-to bureaucrat. We're all supposed to be impressed. Including Michael Scheuer. Whoa, the guy who wrote an anonymous book while he was still working for the government. Yeah, that guy. Have said repeatedly that the reason behind the attacks on September 11th were directly related to our actions in the Middle East over the last several decades. Gee. I've made these points in these other videos, but I guess I have to do them again. I wonder what the Michael Scheuers of the world thought of the actions of the former Soviet Union. I mean, after all, we armed the Soviets against Hitler, did we not? That was us meddling in Europe, was it not? I know. Without Wilson, there wouldn't have been World War I, which wouldn't have been World War II. I heard you. But in reality, should we not have armed the Soviets to fight Hitler? And if we were, should we not have armed the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets? I know it's an endless cycle. It is never the fault of the United States that yesterday's friends bite the hands that feed them. Ever. It is always on the enemy, never on the United States. It's never on the enemy, according to these guys. What are we, the better people? This is backed by the 9/11 Commission report. The many, many things the 9/11 Commission report missed. What is the 9/11 Commission report? The 9/11 Commission report, all that has some good things in it, is basically a bunch of bureaucrats who should have been in front of the stand in front of the 9/11 Commission report instead of holding the 9/11 Commission report. People like Jamie Gorelick, later involved in the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac scandals, put up the wall between the FBI and the CIA so that domestic agencies couldn't share with foreign intel agencies their information, so the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. So that when we found an operative's laptop in the 93 Trade Center bombings, or connected to, we couldn't search it. Something like lawyer's privilege. Oh, this is domestic. You can't do that to people. They have rights. Not that people don't have rights. But in regards to investigating terrorism and national security, you're going to label everything national. No, I'm not. We can't trust you. You use the same thing, the thing with the Patriot Act. Use the same laws as the RICO statutes. The problem with the RICO statutes and the Rudy Giuliani administration in New York was that you used to have a warrant for every single crime. You couldn't go after the crime families. What RICO did was made it be able to go after the crime families for not only committing crimes, but for conspiring to commit crimes. You didn't have to have a warrant for every single soldier, every single capo. You can get a warrant for the family. You could also charge the head of these families with crimes. You didn't have to get a brand new wiretapping warrant for every single member of that particular family. Same rules should apply. And that's what they did in the Patriot Act. Things that should have been put in place a long time ago. But further on the 9/11 Commission report, if you really want to know what was left out of the 9/11 Commission report, including FBI agents and government officials who are now running the 9/11 Commission report instead of testifying in front of it, Jamie Gorelick being one of them, C. Peter Lance. Now there's an author. Why don't you try looking that one up? I'm gonna go read some pape and show you. They are fighting us because they hate our freedom. They are fighting us because they don't want the West meddling in their affairs and bombing their people. I think that if China had been occupying and bombing the United States for the last several decades, our own good would be slightly pissed off as well, and with good reason. Moral relativism in the normative sense. Relativism is the perspective or normative position that because there is no universal moral standard by which to judge others, we ought to tolerate the behavior of others, even when it runs counter to our personal or cultural moral standards. Note, most philosophers find this position is incoherent, or at least that it is unclear how metaethical relativism can lead to ought statements. Basically, since judgment and moral values come from culture, and since we cannot judge other cultures by the version of our own, we cannot judge other cultures. To simply make this ridiculous example, that what if China were to bomb the I don't know, would the United States be sponsoring and hiding jihadi terrorists against China? Who did nothing to the United States? Is it the same scenario? How is it the same scenario? On what planet? Ridiculous. No, Allison. Us going into Afghanistan after Osama bin Laden, who committed 9/11, and after the Taliban, when they held him, is not the same as China invading the United States. Nor is us going into Iraq after Resolution 1441 said that he had to show that he gave up those weapons when he didn't. Nor is the Gulf War anything similar to the Chinese. What the fuck fuck are you talking about?